He thought it was just ink on paper. Silas Vane, the most ruthless Alpha King on the East Coast, didn't need a wife, he needed the shipping routes her father owned. He signed the marriage contract without even looking at the bride's name, convinced he was acquiring a business asset, not a partner. But the moment the chapel doors opened, the business deal died, and a primal obsession was born. 1 cent. 1 look. And the Alpha who never bowed to anyone found his wolf crashing to its knees in the middle of the aisle. This isn't a fairy tale. This is a hunt. The ink in the Mont Blanc fountain pen was older than the woman Silas Vane was about to marry. Silas sat behind a desk that looked less like furniture and more like a slab of obsidian carved from the heart of a mountain. He was 32 years old, the alpha of the sovereign pack, and arguably the most dangerous predator in Manhattan. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit, tailored by Anderson and Shepard on Savile Row, masking a physique that could tear a throat out with 0 effort. "Sign here, Alpha," his beta. Arthur Penhaligon said, sliding the heavy document across the glass surface. Arthur was nervous. He smelled like stale coffee and anxiety. Silas didn't look up from his iPad. He was tracking the falling stock prices of a rival pharmaceutical company he was currently gutting. "Is the merger clause intact, the shipping rights to the Blackwood Harbor?" "Yes, sir. It's all there. Full access to the Iron River territory and exclusive rights to the shipping lanes," Arthur confirmed, tapping the paper. "But, sir, you haven't asked about the girl." Silas finally looked up. His eyes were the color of freezing rain, a pale, icy blue that made lesser wolves whimper. "What is there to ask? Arthur Richard Blackwood is selling his daughter for debt relief. I am buying a wife to secure a trade route. It is a transaction. I don't care if she has Ursula Santaul. 2 heads as long as she stays out of my wing of the penthouse." Inside Silas, his wolf, a massive pitch-black beast named Rage, slept deeply. Rage had been dormant for years, bored by the trivial politics of the human and wolf worlds. He only woke for blood. He certainly didn't care about weddings. "Right." Arthur swallowed hard. "It's just that, well, the contract doesn't specify which Blackwood daughter." Silas scoffed, signing his name Silas Ambrose Vane with a sharp, aggressive scrawl. He didn't even read the paragraph above it. "Richard only has 1 daughter worth parading. Serafina. The blonde one who's been on the cover of Vogue twice. She's loud, vain, and expensive. Perfect for the press. She'll look good in photos and know how to host a gala. Done." He tossed the pen down. "Send the wire transfer. I want the harbor access by Monday." "The wedding is in 3 days, Silas," Arthur reminded him. "I'll be there," Silas said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Tell the stylist to send whatever she needs, and tell Blackwood if he tries to renegotiate the dowry, I'll burn his packhouse to the ground." 300 miles away, in the damp, foggy outskirts of Seattle. Verity Blackwood was on her knees, but not in prayer. She was scrubbing the floor of the Pack Library. Verity was 22, but she looked younger. She was small, with a frame that looked like it might snap in a strong wind. Her hair was a dark, rich espresso color, currently tied up in a messy knot, and her hands were stained with ink and dust. She wasn't the Vogue cover model. She was the mistake. Verity. The screeching voice of her older sister Serafina echoed through the mahogany halls. Verity flinched instinctively, tucking her chin. Serafina stormed in, waving a tablet. "Can you believe this daddy actually did it? He sold you." Verity stood up slowly, wiping her hands on her apron. She didn't speak. She rarely spoke. A childhood accident involving a rogue attack had left a jagged, silvery scar running from her collarbone up the side of her neck, just missing her jugular. It hadn't taken her voice, but the trauma had taken her desire to use it. "I don't understand," Verity whispered, her voice raspy, like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "Silas Vane." Serafina laughed, a cruel tinkling sound. "The butcher of New York. Daddy told him he could have a Blackwood bride. Vane assumed it was me, obviously. But Daddy isn't going to waste me on a man who is rumored to have killed his last 3 challengers with his bare teeth. No, he's sending you." Verity felt the blood drain from her face. Silas Vane. Every wolf knew the name. He was royalty, but the cold industrial kind. He didn't run a pack. He ran an owl. "He signed," Verity asked. "Blindly." Serafina smirked, leaning against a bookshelf. "Daddy tricked him. The contract says the female offspring of Richard Blackwood. It doesn't say Serafina. You leave in the morning. Good luck, little mouse. Try not to get eaten on the wedding night." Verity looked at her reflection in the glass of the library cabinet. She saw the scar. She saw the oversized grey sweater. She saw the terror in her own violet eyes. Eyes that had always unsettled her father because they were the color of a storm. She was going to the slaughter, and the Alpha King didn't even know who he was coming for. The St. Patrick's Cathedral in Manhattan had been rented out for a private event, which meant armed guards at every entrance and a guest list that included senators, tech moguls, and alpha wolves from as far as London. Silas stood at the altar, checking his Rolex. He was annoyed. The market was volatile today, and he was missing a board meeting for this pageantry. "Stop checking the time," Arthur hissed from behind him. "You look like you're waiting for a train, not a bride." "I am waiting for a merger," Silas muttered. "Let's get this over with." The organ music swelled some heavy, dramatic Bach piece that Silas found pretentious. The heavy oak doors at the end of the aisle creaked open. The congregation stood up. Silas remained facing forward, adjusting his cufflinks. He expected the overwhelming scent of Chanel No. 5 and synthetic pheromones, Serafina's signature stench. He expected a fanfare. Instead, the air in the cathedral shifted. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure change, like the moment before lightning strikes. Deep inside Silas's chest, rage woke up. The wolf didn't just wake. He slammed against Silas's ribcage with the force of a battering ram. "Mine!" the voice roared in Silas's head. It wasn't a thought. It was a command. Silas frowned, his composure cracking for the first time in a decade. What he turned around. She was walking down the aisle, but she wasn't walking like a queen. She was walking like a prisoner, marching to the gallows. Silas froze. This wasn't Serafina. The woman approaching him was small. Her dress was an antique lace modest covering her from neck to wrists, clearly pulled from some attic storage. It didn't fit her perfectly. It hung slightly loose on her delicate frame. She held a bouquet of white wild roses, her knuckles white from gripping them so hard. But it was the scent that hit him like a physical blow. It didn't smell like perfume. It smelled like home. It smelled like deep forests, ozone rain on hot asphalt, and wild lavender. It was the most intoxicating, maddening scent Silas had ever encountered. It bypassed his logic and went straight to his hindbrain. "Mate!" Rage screamed, clawing at Silas's mental walls. "She is the one. Submit. Protect." Silas felt his knees buckle. The great Alpha King, who had stood tall against armies, physically stumbled. He grabbed the marble railing of the altar to stop himself from falling. A murmur went through the crowd. "Silas," Arthur whispered, alarmed. "Are you okay?" Silas couldn't hear him. His vision tunneled. The world turned grey except for her. Verity kept walking, her eyes fixed on the floor. She was terrified. She could feel the waves of power rolling off the man at the altar, a dark, suffocating dominance. She prepared herself for his anger. She knew the moment he saw she wasn't the beautiful Serafina, he would reject her. She braced for the humiliation. She reached the steps. She finally looked up. Her violet eyes met his icy blue ones. The impact was nuclear. Silas's heart stopped. Time stopped. He saw the fear in those violet eyes, and it made rage go feral. Who hurt her? Who made our mate afraid? Silas didn't realize he was moving until he was off the altar step. He didn't wait for her to come to him. He stalked down the last 3 steps, closing the distance in a second. Verity flinched, a small, pathetic sound escaping her throat. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for him to yell, to strike her, to demand where her sister was. Instead, she felt a heat radiating near her hand. Silas Vane, the Alpha King, dropped to one knee before her. The entire cathedral went deathly silent. A pin drop would have sounded like a gunshot. Alphas did not kneel. Not in public. Not ever. Silas didn't care. He wasn't in control anymore. His wolf was piloting the ship. He took Verity's trembling hand, his large callous fingers engulfing hers. He brought her hand to his face, inhaling sharply, pressing his nose against her wrist, where her pulse was fluttering like a trapped bird. "You," Silas groaned, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. It wasn't a question. It was a realization. Verity opened her eyes wide with shock. "Alpha," she whispered, her voice rough. Silas looked up at her, his eyes flashing a brilliant, glowing gold, the sign of a wolf surfacing. "Who are you?" he demanded, but his voice was thick with awe, not anger. "Where have you been hiding?" "I'm Verity," she stammered. "I'm the other one. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I'm not Serafina." Silas let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the floorboards, making the front row of guests shiver. He stood up slowly, towering over her, blocking out the rest of the world. He looked furious, but Verity realized with a jolt that the fury wasn't directed at her. "Serafina." Silas spat the name like a curse. He reached out his hand, hovering over her cheek, trembling slightly, as he fought the urge to claim her right there, in front of God and the press. "If they had sent me Serafina, I would have killed her for standing in your place." He turned to the priest, his hand snapping out to grip Verity's waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. She gasped, her hands landing on his chest. He was solid as rock. "Skip the sermon," Silas barked at the terrified priest. "Get to the vows, now!" He looked down at Verity, his gaze possessing her, devouring her. "You are not a contract," he whispered into her hair, loud enough for only her to hear. "You are my queen, and if you try to run, I will burn the world down to find you." Verity's heart hammered against her ribs. She had expected a business partner. She had expected a monster. She hadn't expected to be looked at like she was the only source of oxygen in the room. The problem was, in Silas's world, obsession was just another form of danger, and Verity wasn't sure she could survive being loved by a predator. The ride to the penthouse was silent, but it was a silence thick enough to choke on. The limousine, a sleek, bulletproof Maybach, cut through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan like a shark through dark water. In the back, Silas sat rigidly, his large hands resting on his knees, fists clenched so tight the knuckles were white. He was breathing in a specific rhythm, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, a technique his combat instructor had taught him years ago to control the shift. His wolf rage was pacing inside his mind, scratching at the walls of his psyche. Touch her, claim her, mark her. Why are we sitting so far away? Verity sat pressed against the opposite door, as far from him as the leather interior would allow. She was still trembling. The adrenaline of the wedding had faded, leaving behind a cold, clammy terror. She was married to the Alpha King. She stole a glance at him. He was terrifyingly beautiful, like a statue carved by a master artist who only worked in anger and ice. His jaw was sharp, his shoulders broad enough to block out the sun, and he radiated a heat that fogged the windows. The car stopped in front of the Vane Tower, a glass needle piercing the sky. "We are here," Silas said. His voice was rough, darker than before. The door opened. Silas didn't wait for the chauffeur. He was out in a fluid motion, rounding the car to open Verity's door. He extended a hand. Verity hesitated. In her father's house, hesitation was punished. She flinched, expecting a reprimand, and quickly placed her small, cold hand in his. Silas frowned as he felt her flinch. A low growl rumbled in his chest, barely audible. He hated that she was afraid of him. He hated even more that she had been trained to be afraid. They took the private elevator to the penthouse. The ride was a dizzying ascent of 90 stories. When the doors slid open, Verity gasped. The penthouse was a fortress of glass and steel. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a 360-degree view of the city, the lights of New York twinkling below like a carpet of diamonds. But the space was cold. It lacked warmth, photos, or life. It was a predator's den, minimalist and severe. "Arthur has arranged your things in the master suite," Silas said, walking in. He loosened his tie, pulling the silk strip from his neck and tossing it onto a black leather sofa. "You will not sleep in the guest wing. You are my mate. You sleep where I sleep." Verity stopped in the middle of the living room, clutching her bouquet of wilting roses. "Alpha." She started, her voice raspy. Silas turned on her so fast, she stumbled back. "Silas," he corrected. "To everyone else, I am Alpha or King. To you, I am Silas. Never call me by a title. It puts distance between us, and I will not tolerate distance." He stalked toward her, and Verity's back hit the cold glass of the window. There was nowhere to run. He stopped inches from her. He reached out his hand, moving towards her neck. Verity's eyes widened. Her hand shot up instinctively to cover the left side of her neck, right where the high lace collar of her wedding dress ended. "Don't," she whispered, panic spiking in her scent. Silas froze. His nostrils flared. He could smell the spike of cortisol, fear, and something else. Old pain. He smelled healed tissue. "What are you hiding?" he asked softly. "Nothing," she lied, her voice shaking. "Please, I need to change." "Verity." His voice was a command, vibrating with power. "Move your hand." She shook her head, tears welling in her violet eyes. "It's ugly. You don't want to see it. Serafina said it makes me broken goods. She said you'd send me back." The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. "Serafina," Silas said, his voice dangerously calm, "is a fool who is lucky I am currently occupied with you, or I would hunt her down tonight." He stepped closer, his body shielding her from the city lights. "I do not send things back, especially not what is mine. Now, move your hand." Verity sobbed once, a broken sound, and slowly lowered her hand. Silas reached out and hooked a finger into the high lace collar of her vintage dress. With a sudden sharp tear, he ripped the delicate fabric down to her shoulder. Verity gasped, covering her chest with her arms. But Silas wasn't looking at her body. He was looking at her neck. The scar was jagged, a thick, silvery line of keloid tissue that ran from behind her ear down her throat and disappeared under her collarbone. It wasn't a surgical scar. It was a bite mark, a ragged, vicious tear from a wolf's jaws that had nearly ended her life. Silas stared at it. His pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black. He traced the line of the scar with his thumb, his touch feather-light. "A rogue?" he asked, his voice devoid of emotion. Verity nodded, looking at the floor. "I was 12. My father. He left the perimeter gate open. He was drunk. The rogue got in. I was in the garden." Silas went very still. The father left the gate open. The rage that exploded inside Silas was so potent, he physically shook with it. It wasn't just negligence, it was criminal. Richard Blackwood hadn't just sold his daughter, he had almost killed her a decade ago. "Does it hurt?" Silas asked, his thumb resting on the pulse point just below the scar. "Sometimes," she whispered, "when it rains." Silas leaned down. Verity tensed, expecting teeth. Instead, she felt the soft, hot brush of lips. Silas kissed the scar. He kissed the top of it behind her ear. He kissed the jagged center. He kissed the end of it near her collarbone. It wasn't a sexual kiss. It was a benediction, a worship. He was claiming her pain as his own. "You think this makes you ugly?" Silas murmured against her skin, the vibration sending shivers down her spine. "It is a mark of survival. It means you fought. It means death tried to take you, and failed." He pulled back, gripping her face in both hands, forcing her to look at him. His golden wolf eyes burned into hers. "You are not broken, Verity. You are forged. And I swear to you the only thing that will ever touch this scar again is my lips. No one will ever hurt you again. Not your father. Not your sister. Not the world." Verity stared at him, her breath hitching. For 22 years, she had been the invisible girl, the scarred mistake. And here was the most powerful man on the East Coast, looking at her jagged skin, like it was precious metal. "Why?" she asked, a single tear tracking through the dust on her cheek. "Why me? You could have had anyone." "I didn't want anyone," Silas said, wiping the tear away with his thumb. "I was waiting for the storm, and then you walked in." He stepped back, the intensity dialing down just enough for her to breathe. "Go shower. There are clothes in the closet. I had a stylist buy a wardrobe, though I suspect it is not your style yet. We will fix that. Tonight we sleep. That is all." Verity blinked. "That is all. My wolf wants to tear this building down and claim you on the ruins," Silas admitted bluntly, turning away to hide the strain in his expression. "But you are exhausted, terrified, and you smell like you haven't eaten a full meal in weeks. I am not a monster, Verity. I can wait." He walked to the wet bar and poured himself a dark amber whiskey. "Go, before I change my mind." Verity didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed the hem of her torn dress and ran for the bathroom. Inside the massive marble shower under the spray of hot water, Verity Blackwood cried. But for the first time in her life, they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of relief. Outside in the bedroom, Silas Vane stood by the window watching the rain lash against the glass. He pulled out his phone and dialed Arthur. "Sir." Arthur answered on the first ring. "It's midnight." "I want the Blackwood pack audited," Silas said, his voice cold as death. "Every penny, every trade deal. And Arthur, yes, Alpha, find out who the rogue was that attacked the Blackwood estate 10 years ago. If he is still alive, bring him to me. If he is dead, find out where he is buried, so I can dig him up and kill him again." He hung up. The hunt had begun. The next morning, the sun didn't just rise. It assaulted the penthouse through the floor-to-ceiling glass. Verity woke up alone. The bed was massive, a sprawling expanse of Egyptian cotton, and the other side was cold. For a moment she panicked, thinking the events of the previous day had been a fever dream, and she was back in her cramped attic room at the Blackwood estate. Then she saw the ceiling 20 feet high and painted a stark modern white. She sat up, clutching the silk sheet to her chest. She was wearing one of Silas's t-shirts she had found in the closet. It hung off her like a tent smelling of sandalwood and raw power. On the bedside table there was a note scrawled in aggressive, sharp handwriting. "Board meeting. Couldn't cancel. Back by 2 o'clock. Eat. There is food. Do not leave the building." Verity let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. He was gone. The pressure in the air was lighter. She got up and wandered out into the penthouse. It was quiet, eerily so. She found the kitchen a stainless steel laboratory that looked like it had never been used. However, on the island there was a spread of pastries fruit and a thermos of coffee. She ate a croissant tentatively, standing up, ready to run if someone yelled at her for stealing food. Old habits died hard. "Good morning, Madame Vane." Verity jumped, nearly dropping the coffee. An older woman with silver hair, pulled into a tight bun, stood in the doorway. She wore a grey housekeeper's uniform and looked stern, but her eyes were kind. "I'm sorry," Verity stammered. "I didn't know anyone was here." "I am Mrs. Halloway," the woman said, bowing her head slightly, a sign of respect to an alpha female. "I manage the household staff. Mr. Vane requested that we give you space this morning, but I wanted to inform you that the security team is stationed at the elevator and the service entrance." "Security?" Verity asked. "You are the Alpha Queen now, madam," Mrs. Halloway said matter-of-factly. "You are a high-value target." Verity swallowed. Alpha Queen. The title felt like a coat that was 3 sizes too big. "Thank you, Mrs. Halloway. I'll just look around." Verity spent the next 2 hours exploring. She found a library that rivaled her father's, though the books here were about economics, war strategy, and architectural history. She found a gym that looked like a torture chamber. Eventually she found the terrace. It was a garden in the sky. High walls of glass protected it from the wind, allowing Japanese maples and hardy vines to grow 90 stories up. There was a stone bench near a fountain. Verity sat down, closing her eyes, enjoying the rare moment of peace. The elevator chimed inside the penthouse. Verity's eyes snapped open. Back by 2 o'clock, the note had said. It was only noon. She stood up and walked back into the living room, a smile touching her lips. Silas. It wasn't Silas. Standing in the center of the living room was a woman. She was tall, statuesque, with hair the color of spun gold, and a white pantsuit that cost more than Verity's entire existence. She was holding a Hermes Birkin bag like a weapon. The woman turned her green eyes, scanning Verity with a look of absolute revulsion. "Say," the woman drawled, her voice smooth and poisonous, "this is the charity case." Verity froze. Her instincts screamed danger. This woman was a wolf, and a high-ranking one. Her aura was sharp and aggressive. "Who are you?" Verity asked, her voice quiet. The woman laughed, tossing her bag onto the sofa. "I'm Lady Beatrice Sterling. My father sits on the Sovereign Council. I'm the woman Silas was supposed to marry, before your father scammed him with a discount contract." Beatrice walked closer, the heels of her Louboutins clicking menacingly on the marble floor. She circled Verity like a shark circling a wounded seal. "Look at you," Beatrice sneered. "You're a twig. No hips. You smell like fear and cheap soap. You think you can handle Silas? He's a monster, darling. He breaks things. He needs a wolf of equal standing, not a broken little mouse." Verity stepped back. "He chose me." "He honored a contract," Beatrice corrected, stepping into Verity's personal space. She was taller, looming over Verity. "But contracts can be broken, or annulled, if the bride is found to be unsuitable, or dead." Beatrice's eyes flashed neon green. Her wolf was surfacing. She reached out and shoved Verity. It wasn't a hard shove, but Verity wasn't expecting it. She stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the rug and falling hard onto her elbows. "Get up," Beatrice barked. "Let's see if you have any fight in you, or are you just going to roll over and show your belly?" Verity looked up, her heart hammering. The terror was there, familiar and cold. But beneath the terror, something else stirred. Something that had woken up when Silas kissed her scar. "She is in our home," a small voice in Verity's head whispered. "She is mocking our mate." "Get out," Verity whispered. Beatrice laughed. "Ick me." She raised her hand, her nails lengthening into claws. "I'm going to do Silas a favor and scratch that pretty little face of yours. Then he'll have to reject you." Beatrice swung, but the blow never landed. The elevator doors blasted open with a sound like a gunshot. "Beatrice!" The roar was so loud it shook the glass windows. Beatrice froze her hand mid-air. She turned pale as she looked toward the entrance. Silas Vane stood there. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His tie was gone. His white shirt was straining against his muscles, and his eyes were burning balls of liquid gold fire. He looked like a demon of vengeance. He didn't walk. He blurred. In a split second, he was across the room. He didn't hit Beatrice. He wasn't that crude. He grabbed her by the throat and lifted her off the ground, pinning her against the wall with one hand. "Silas," Beatrice choked, clawing at his wrist. You touched her." Silas snarled his voice, a distorted dual tone of man and wolf. "You entered my home. You threatened my mate." "She's weak," Beatrice gasped. "I was showing you." Silas slammed her harder against the wall, cracking the plaster. "She is my queen. If she is weak, I am her strength. If she is soft, I am her shield." "But you," Silas leaned in his teeth, bared inches from her face. "You are nothing. You are a trespasser." Verity scrambled to her feet. She saw the murderous intent in Silas's eyes. He was going to kill Beatrice, right here. "Silas," Verity cried out. Silas didn't look at her, his focus entirely on the throat in his hand. "Silas, stop!" Verity ran forward and grabbed his other arm. It was like grabbing a steel beam. "Don't kill her, please." At the sound of Verity's voice, Silas shuddered. He looked down at her. The gold in his eyes receded slightly, revealing the icy blue. He saw her fear not for herself, but for him. She didn't want him to be a murderer. He looked back at Beatrice, his lip curling in disgust. He dropped her. Beatrice crumbled to the floor, gasping for air, clutching her bruised neck. "Get out," Silas said, his voice deadly quiet. "You have 1 hour to leave the city. If I see you in New York again, if I smell your scent anywhere near my wife, I will rip your father's council seat out from under him, and I will hunt you for salt." Beatrice didn't argue. She scrambled up, grabbed her bag, and ran for the elevator, hitting the button frantically. She disappeared, fleeing for her life. Silas stood, heaving his chest, rising and falling. He refused to turn around. He was ashamed. He had lost control. He had almost killed a high-ranking noble in his own living room. He was the monster everyone said he was. "Silas," Verity whispered. "Don't," he rasped, facing the window. "Don't come near me. The wolf is close." He gripped the window frame, the glass groaning under the pressure. Verity looked at his back. She saw the tension, the self-loathing. She remembered Beatrice's words. "He's a monster." But she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who had come home early because he was worried. A man who had defended her when no one else ever had. Verity didn't run away. She walked forward. She wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. Silas went rigid. "Verity, I am dangerous." "I know," she murmured into his shirt. "But you're dangerous for me. Not to me." Silas let out a long, ragged breath, his hands covering hers where they rested on his stomach. He slumped forward, his forehead resting against the cool glass. "I will put guards on the floor," he swore. "No one gets in. Ever again." "I'm okay," she promised. He turned around in her arms, lifting her up effortlessly, so she was eye level with him. He buried his face in her neck, inhaling the scent of lavender and rain. "I am not okay," he admitted, his voice muffled against her skin. "I felt your fear across the city. It nearly drove me mad." He pulled back, looking at her with an intensity that burned. "We are going to the Blackwood Pack this weekend," Silas announced. Verity stiffened. "Why?" "Because," Silas said, a dark, predatory grin touching his lips, a grin that promised retribution. "It is tradition to visit the in-laws, and I have a few questions for your father regarding the definition of care." Verity shivered. She almost felt sorry for her father. Almost. The Alpha King was going to war. And for the first time, Verity was on the winning side. The convoy that departed New York City looked less like a family visit and more like a paramilitary invasion. Silas didn't travel light. He traveled with 3 black Cadillac Escalade ES5s, flanked by 2 Ducati motorbikes, ridden by enforcers. Inside the lead vehicle, the atmosphere was pressurized. Verity sat next to Silas, her hands folded in her lap. She wore a midnight blue cashmere dress that Silas's stylist had insisted brought out the storm in her eyes. Around her neck sat a diamond choker, a tangible claim. It covered the start of her scar, but Silas had made it clear the diamonds weren't to hide her. They were to warn others that she was expensive, protected, and off-limits. "Stop shaking," Silas said. He didn't look up from the dossier Arthur had handed him, but his hand drifted over to rest heavily on her knee. The heat of his palm seeped through the fabric, grounding her. "I can't help it," Verity whispered. "You don't know my father when he's angry. He'll be furious that you brought me back so soon. He'll think I failed." "He won't have time to be furious," Silas said, flipping a page. "He'll be too busy explaining why his shipping manifests show 3 tons of undeclared cargo moving through the Iron River ports last month." Silas looked out the window as the dense evergreen forests of Washington state blurred by. "Besides, you aren't returning as his daughter Verity. You are returning as Mrs. Vane. If he raises his voice at you, I remove his tongue. If he raises a hand, I remove the arm. It is simple math." The car slowed as they approached the Blackwood estate. It was a sprawling Victorian mansion that had once been grand, but now looked like a rotting tooth. The paint was peeling, the iron gates rusted, and the gardens overgrown. It smelled of mildew and old money that had long since run out. As the convoy crunched up the gravel driveway, Verity felt the old panic rising. This was the house where she had learned to be invisible. This was the house where she had bled. The cars stopped. The security team deployed instantly. Silas stepped out, buttoning his suit jacket, a Tom Ford masterpiece that made him look like a sleek, lethal weapon. He walked around and opened Verity's door. "Chin up," he commanded softly. "Look at me." Verity looked at him. "You own the man inside that house," Silas said intensely. "I bought his debt. I own his land. I own his future. And you own me. Do you understand the hierarchy, Verity? You are at the top." Verity took a deep breath. "I own the monster who owns the monster." She took his hand. The front doors swung open. Richard Blackwood stood there, flanked by Serafina and his beta. A brute named Kyle. Richard was a tall man, handsome in a jagged way, but his eyes were bloodshot, and he smelled of gin and desperation. Serafina looked perfect, dressed in red silk, but her eyes narrowed with jealousy as she saw the diamonds around Verity's neck. "Alpha Vane," Richard boomed, forcing a jovial smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We weren't expecting the happy couple so soon. To what do we owe the honor?" Silas didn't smile. He didn't offer his hand. He simply walked up the steps, pulling Verity with him, forcing Richard to step aside or be trampled. "Inspection," Silas said coldly, walking past his father-in-law into the foyer. The house smelled the same to Verity, dust lemon polish and cruelty. "Inspection." Richard hurried after them. "I assure you the port handover is proceeding on schedule. There's no need for— I'm not inspecting the port yet," Silas interrupted, stopping in the center of the grand hall. He looked around with open disdain at the peeling wallpaper. "I'm inspecting the merchandise I purchased. You sold me a bride, Richard, but you lied about the product details." Serafina stepped forward, flipping her blonde hair. "Oh, Silas, honestly, we did you a favor. Verity is manageable. If you had wanted a real Luna, you know you should have asked for me directly." She placed a hand on Silas's bicep, her voice dropping to a purr. "It's not too late to trade up." The air in the room vanished. Silas looked at Serafina's hand on his arm, as if a cockroach had just landed there. "Remove your hand," Silas said, his voice dropping to a subsonic growl that vibrated the crystal chandelier above them, "before I snap it at the wrist." Serafina snatched her hand back, her face draining of color. Silas turned to Verity. "My wife," he announced to the room, his voice ringing with authority, "is the only thing of value in this entire rotting territory, and I am here to find out exactly how she got that scar on her neck, because my security team looked into the rogue attack from 10 years ago. Strange thing, Richard. There were no police reports, no perimeter breach alarms triggered." Silas took a step toward Richard, who was now sweating profusely. "So tell me," Silas whispered, "who really tore my wife's throat out?" Dinner was a masterclass in tension. They sat at the long mahogany table, Silas at the head, Verity at his right, Richard and Serafina opposite. The food was an intricate roast duck, but Silas hadn't touched a bite. He just watched them swirling a glass of water. He refused the wine. "You're not eating, Silas," Richard noted nervously. "I don't eat with liars," Silas replied evenly. "It gives me indigestion." Verity kept her head down, but she was listening. Her hearing had always been sharper than average, a survival mechanism. She could hear Richard's heart hammering. She could hear Serafina tapping away on her phone under the table. But she heard something else too. A sound coming from beneath the floorboards. A scratching. A low rhythmic thumping. Thump, thump, thump. It was coming from the old wine cellar, the one she had been forbidden to enter her entire life. "The audit is complete, Richard," Silas said, suddenly tossing a file onto the table. It slid across the wood and knocked over a salt shaker. "My beta Arthur just emailed me the final results. You aren't just in debt. You're laundering money for the cartel in Chicago. You're using the shipping containers to move Wolfsbane K, the synthetic suppressor drug. Verity gasped. Wolfsbane K was illegal, a poison used to torture wolves to keep them from shifting to drive them mad. That's preposterous. Richard stood up, slamming his hand on the table. I am an alpha. I would never traffic poison. Sit down, Silas commanded. He didn't shout, but the command slammed Richard back into his chair as if gravity had increased tenfold. I found traces of it in your warehouse, and I smell it now. Silas inhaled, his nose flaring. It's in the house. Verity's eyes widened. The smell, the faint, chemical, acrid smell she had always associated with her father's private study. It's downstairs, Verity whispered. Everyone looked at her. Shut up, girl, Richard hissed. Don't speak to her. Silas warned, his eyes flashing gold. He looked at Verity. What is downstairs, sweetheart? The cellar. Verity said, her voice gaining strength. She stood up. The noise. I've heard it for years. The scratching. Verity, sit down, Serafina shrieked. No, Verity said. She looked at her sister, Tilly looked at her, and realized Serafina wasn't scary. She was just a bully in a red dress. I want to see what's in the cellar. Arthur, Silas spoke into his lapel mic. Bring the team in. Secure the house. No one leaves. Silas stood up and offered his arm to Verity. Lead the way, my queen. They walked to the heavy oak door under the stairs. Richard was shouting protests, but two of Silas's enforcers had already entered the room and pinned him to his chair. Verity opened the door. The smell of rot and chemicals billowed up. Silas stepped in front of her, shielding her, and led them down the stone steps. The cellar wasn't a wine storage anymore. It was a lab. Beakers, tubes, and bags of blue powder lined the shelves. But in the back, inside a cage reinforced with silver bars, was a creature. It was a wolf, or it had been. It was emaciated, its fur patchy, its eyes glowing with a chemically induced madness. It threw itself against the bars as they entered Holdsnarling. Verity stopped. She knew those eyes. Uncle Julian, she whispered. The wolf paused, tilting its head. My God, Silas breathed. This isn't a rogue. This is a pack member. It's my mother's brother, Verity said, tears streaming down her face. He disappeared 10 years ago. Father said he ran away. He didn't run. A voice came from the top of the stairs. Richard stood there. He had broken free from the guards, or rather he was holding a detonator in his hand. He was the first test subject, Richard sneered, his face twisted into a mask of insanity. The Wolfsbane K needs live subjects to test the potency. Julian was available. And when he went mad and broke out, he's the one who bit you, Verity. I didn't leave the gate open. I let him out to see if he could still hunt. Silas turned slowly to face Richard. The rage radiating off him was so hot, the glass beakers on the shelves began to crack. You fed your brother-in-law poison, Silas said, his voice hollow, and then set him on your own daughter as a science experiment. Business is business, Silas, Richard yelled, waving the detonator, and you're bad for business. The house is rigged vein C4 in the foundation. I blow this switch, and we all go to hell together. Verity looked at the detonator. She looked at the caged, broken wolf that was her uncle. And then she looked at Silas. Silas wasn't looking at the bomb. He was looking at her. Do you trust me? His eyes asked. Verity nodded. Richard, Silas said calmly, look at your hand. Richard looked down. What? You're shaking, Silas mocked. You're not a killer, Richard. You're a middle manager with a drug habit. I'll do it, Richard screamed. No, Verity said. She stepped out from behind Silas. Verity, stay back, Silas warned. He won't hurt me, Verity said, walking towards the stairs, because I'm the only asset he has left. Verity, Richard yelled. Stay back. Verity kept walking. She stopped 3 steps below him. You sold me to save yourself, Dad, but you forgot one thing. What? Richard spat. You signed the contract blindly, Verity said softly. But Silas didn't sign the annulment clause. What are you talking about? Silas, Verity said, her voice clear. Now. It wasn't a question. It was a command from a queen to her king. Silas moved faster than thought. He didn't run at Richard. He threw a silver scalpel from the table beside him. The blade flew through the air and pinned Richard's hand, the one holding the detonator, to the wooden door frame. Richard screamed, dropping the device. It clattered down the stairs, bouncing to Verity's feet. Verity picked it up. She looked at her father, who was wailing, pinned to the wood. The contract is terminated, Verity said. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Silas's security team swarmed the house. Serafina was found trying to load jewelry into a suitcase. She was escorted out in handcuffs, screaming about her rights. Richard was sedated and taken into custody not by the police, but by the High Council of Alphas. His crimes against his own kin and the trafficking of wolfsbane would earn him a life sentence in the deep prisons if he survived the interrogation. In the cellar, Silas personally broke the lock of the cage. He sedated Julian, gently wrapping the broken wolf in blankets. We have the best doctors in New York, Silas told Verity, as the medics carried her uncle out. We can flush the drugs out. He might never fully recover, but he will live. He will be safe. Verity stood in the driveway watching the flashing lights. The house, her prison, looked small now. Silas walked up behind her, wrapping his suit jacket around her shoulders. It was raining again, a light Pacific mist. It is done, Silas said. I seized the territory. The shipping routes are mine. The house is yours. Burn it, Verity said. Silas raised an eyebrow. It's a historic property. The land value alone, I don't care. Verity turned to him. Her eyes were dry, fierce. Burn it down, Silas. I don't want to fix it. I want it gone. Silas stared at her for a moment. Then a slow, dark smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure pride. As you wish, my queen. He gestured to his head of security. Torch it. They stood by the black SUV and watched. It took 20 minutes for the flames to catch the old, dry timber. As the fire roared, consuming the library, the cellar, the room where Verity had cried herself to sleep for a decade, Silas pulled her against his chest. He didn't just hold her. He wrapped himself around her, a barrier between her and the world. You are free, he whispered into her hair. No, Verity corrected him, leaning back to look into his face. She reached up, tracing the sharp line of his jaw. I'm not free. I'm yours. Silas groaned a sound, torn from his soul. He kissed her, then not like he had in the chapel, and not like he had in the bedroom. He kissed her like a man drowning who had finally found air. It was possessive, desperate, and full of a love that terrified them both. I signed that paper to get a harbor, Silas murmured against her lips, the firelight dancing in his golden eyes. I had no idea I was signing for my life. Are you sorry? Verity teased, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Silas looked at the burning house, then down at the woman who held his leash. I would have signed it in blood, he swore. I would have signed it if it cost me the entire kingdom. He picked her up, carrying her bridal style toward the car. Let's go home, Verity. We have a pack to rule. Silas Vane thought he was a businessman making a deal. He thought he was buying a trade route and a trophy wife. He never expected that the quiet, scarred girl in the oversized sweater would be the one to bring him to his knees and the only one strong enough to stand by his side when the world caught fire. In the end, the Alpha King didn't tame his bride. She tamed him. They say that in New York, if you listen closely on quiet nights, you can't hear the Alpha King's roar anymore. You only hear the quiet whisper of his queen and the sound of the most dangerous wolf in the world purring at her feet. Thank you for listening to this story of betrayal, revenge, and a love that defies logic. If you enjoyed the twist of Verity's hidden strength and Silas's absolute obsession, please hit that like button. It helps the channel immensely. Share this video with a friend who loves a dark werewolf romance, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next part of our saga. Until next time, keep your pack close.